Hey everyone, welcome to the Outside the Walls podcast. My name is John White.
I'm Steve Reeves.
And I'm Casey McDonald.
And today we are joined by special guest Paul Pollard. Paul has been a professor at Harding University for 40 years in the Bible department, teaching primarily Greek. And he preached for 20 years at the Northside Church of Christ in Augusta. Mm-hmm. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Good to be here, and appreciate this invitation, being with such fine gentlemen as we have here at this table.
Well, let's hope that's still true at the end of this.
We'll take that a little bit, you know. Well, I'd like to say personally what a joy it is to have Paul with us. Paul was one of my professors at Harding a long time ago now, but I had elementary Greek with Paul. And still remember that class extremely well and have been appreciative of it for so many years. And Paul, not only that, but we've had a friendship that has lasted for many, many years now. And so, Paul, it's a personal pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you, Steve. I'm still glad you speak to me after persecuted you relentlessly, and Casey, too. So I'm glad you still like me.
Yeah, we do.
Well, I remember having you as a professor, and you always made us think that we are scholars, even as much as we were not scholars.
You would always greet us every day. Welcome, scholars. Welcome,
scholars. You were scholars.
I don't remember that Greek experience. I think my teacher had a different approach about how smart we were.
Yeah. Well, I was always blessed with good students, and so it was the easiest job in the world for me because I had great students.
Well, I know I was probably the exception, but
Well, now everyone knows where to go to get some great stories about Steve.
Yes.
I could probably conjure up 2 or 3.
I would think. I'm afraid so.
Well, Paul, today we wanted to talk with you about a book that was written by a man named Thom Rainer, The Post-Quarantine Church. Can just kind of throw that up there real quick. And this is a book that you read and then sent a sort of a summary / review around to, I guess, various churches. At least it got to our eldership.
Well, actually, I sent it to Dan Williams' blog.
Okay.
And so he liked it and wanted to put it out. And so that's where I actually put it out for the first time. I did, I think I sent a little blog, little summary to our eldership at College Church. And so that may be where you guys
got passed around.
Scott Ragsdale, one of our elders here, is the one who passed it around among our elders and our staff. And so we proceeded then to read the book. I know all of us on staff have.
Oh, good.
And I think a number of our elders have read it as well.
Good. Well, you know, we have to kind of keep our eyes open, and sometimes the news is maybe not as good as we'd like for it to be, but we do have to kind of keep our ears out for what's going on. And, you know, this guy's been a church consultant for 30 years, and so I thought, well, he's bound to have something to say. You know, we may not agree with all of it. I certainly don't, but it's some food for thought, you know.
Right.
And if we get some conversation going, then and here we are. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's good.
That is a good thing.
Yeah.
So one of the first things I wanted us to chat a little bit about was Thom makes it really clear very early in the book that, you know, he's having conversations with all these different church leaders, and they keep saying, well, when are we going to get things back to normal?
Yeah.
And the first kind of point he has to drive home is the back to normal is not there. We're not going back to how it was. And not to say that churches wouldn't come back to some sense of normalcy, but things have been forever changed. Can you kind of speak to what that means and kind of what that looks like for churches?
Well, you know, I think that this is kind of blunt language he's using there. And I think he has a point that's a very good point that makes us at least realize that what we were before, we will be part of, but we will never, ever have it exactly like we had before. For one thing, we're not going to have the same people back that we had before. And so even if everything else is fairly normal, there are going to be some other things that are a little bit abnormal for us. And so I think we like the status quo. We know we're conservative people. Our elderships are mostly pretty conservative. And we like the status quo. We like that good, comfortable feeling. And we want to always kind of have that comfortable feeling. We don't like anybody to rock the boat or change it. And so it's a statement that really resonated with me because I had talked with people about, well, when we get back to normal, then I read this book and I said, I don't think we are ever going to exactly be at that normal place we once were in all respects.
Yeah. Yeah, he mentions the different kinds of people that we'll have in post-quarantine church. And one of those he mentions is digital-only people.
Yeah.
And so I was wanting to maybe discuss some things of how, in what ways can we make an effort to reach those who are only digitally connected to our church? I mean, I think about those who might even be in different states that have come across our worship assemblies and are consistently worshiping with us. They might not have a local congregation and might even be contributing financially to our churches. How do we go about in this post-quarantine world ministering to people who might consider themselves members of our local church but don't necessarily live in our local communities?
Well, I can give you 3 perfect examples of that. I have 3 sisters that live in Atlanta. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. And my 3 sisters, 2 of them never go to church. But during this pandemic, they started watching the college church live stream. And they are regular members. And one of my sisters sends her contribution to the college church. And I'm going to encourage her to find a local church there in Atlanta. But there are 3 of my sisters that 2 of them and 1 of them wasn't very regular. They're there every Sunday. They sign in. I see their names every Sunday. And so we're reaching people like that are part of that digital process. And I think we got tons of people out there. I suspect here that you have people watching that you've never ever had, maybe even in your building. Probably haven't had them in the building. Yeah. And so this is part of the blessing of this. And then I think a side benefit is we have a lot of shut-ins who are, for the first time in a long time, going to be able to have contact with a kind of a normal church service, where they can be a part of it, rather than just somebody bringing the Lord's Supper to them on Sunday afternoons or something. They can actually be a part of it. So that's a blessing. But there are a lot of people out there that are going to be tagging into us, and how we reach those people is going to be part of the struggle.
Yeah.
I've been very encouraged by our eldership here at Westside, and I'm sure the elders at the college, and you also serve as an elder at the college church,
I'm one of the
don't
elders
you?
there.
So our elders have been very supportive of our efforts to upgrade our online presence, whether it be through our website or our video programming, our live streams, things such as this. They've, in fact, just recently even have made a financial outlay for us to purchase some equipment that will help us to upgrade these things so that we can continue, even as we have plans now to start coming back together on a more regular basis. But we can continue our efforts reaching out to people online.
Yeah. Well, I have been doing some reading around in this area and read some recent Barna research that said that we're going to have to learn how to be as creative and as innovative and as inspiring on our outline, on our online digital presence as we are with our in-church, in-house presence. And we've got to give the same sort of thinking to that digital church as we do to our actual meeting present in person with each other. And so, I think that's a new domain for a lot of folks. Sounds like you guys are making some good headway, though, in this.
We're trying to, because it's one of those things that I think before this, there were some churches that really saw the value in this and moved towards it, and we're doing a lot of online stuff. But certainly this has caused a boom in online presence for churches everywhere, which is such a huge blessing. Yeah. And so we just want to, our effort is just kind of how can we continue to do that? And now we're starting to think, okay, well, everyone's coming back. Things are kind of, we're getting vaccines and there's a lot of mandates being lifted and things like that. So more people are coming back that had maybe chosen not to be there before. So now what is the value of our digital content going forward? Yeah. Or how do we reach people with that? So that's kind of the question that's been on our minds. Yeah.
Well, it's going to have to be something we pay a lot of attention to, I think. And And a lot of us just stumbled into it,
yes.
forced into it. We didn't know what Zoom was. We had no idea what it was like to live stream and even how to find it, And so it's forced us to do some things we had not really been too much on the cutting edge of doing. But other churches have, And one of the things I've wanted to do for a long time is for us to have a Sunday morning broadcast so that people here in service, maybe in Cersei, I don't know, where we have a channel or something, because we've got great preaching, we got great churches, and we're not doing it. We're doing what we're doing now with live streaming and stuff, but these people have channels out there. And we have to think a little bigger, I think, than even what we're doing now.
Yeah.
Good point.
Reach these people.
One of the things that Thom Rainer outlines in his book is the challenges that we face going forward. And you did a great job in your book review kind of outlining those challenges. And I was curious to ask, what do you see as maybe one of the greatest challenges of these that he outlines?
I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. We play golf together. Well, not name his name. And he said something that I think is pretty representative. And he said, I don't know if I'm going to be coming back to the church again. He said, I can sit at my breakfast table. I can sit there in my underwear. I can sip my coffee and eat my breakfast while I watch the live streaming from the church. And if I don't like that guy preaching, I can switch over and I can listen to another Church of Christ preacher, or I can listen to Andy Stanley. I don't know if I'm going back or not. I've got a plethora of choices out there to choose from, and I don't know if I'm going to go back or not. And that's going to be the challenge with a lot of folks. This guy's a good Christian man too.
Yeah.
And so
I was talking to my neighbor not long ago, a woman who lives across the street from us, a very sweet lady, and she's a member of the college church. But she regularly tells me, she says, I listen to you on Sunday morning, and then I listen to Noel, and then I listen to someone else. And so, that she's just getting a whole, as you say, a whole plethora of different speakers throughout the day.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's right. I think that's one of the big concerns that church leaders have today is, how do we maintain a connectivity with people who have settled into this online presence and just feel very comfortable with it and really don't have any desire to come back physically.
Yeah, it's easy church. Mm-hmm. It's easy church, and I think there's a huge downside to that, because you miss the fellowship, you miss being with everybody, and the upbuilding and encouragement, and it's not a good thing, I think, in the long run. But this thing is causing some challenges. Like this friend of mine watches everything. And I'll be honest with you, I have not been in our church building for a morning worship since March of last year. I've been in that little risky area, and I just haven't been back. And I've got my COVID shots now, and I guess I can go back and do something now. But we've kind of grown comfortable. We get up and we watch it, and my hair is not washed, and I can I haven't shaved. I can get up and go to church, and sit there at the table and just have a good old time. And if we don't like this guy, we watch Andy Stanley or somebody like that. And here is the challenge that this is facing for us, is that now we are more in a more competitive world. Yes. Our people are seeing some really good preaching out there. And I'm a preacher. I worked at Harding for 40 years, so I could afford to go out to these little churches and basically preach for nothing, because I wanted to help them. And so I'm a preacher at heart, and I'm talking mainly as a preacher to myself. But these people are seeing a different type preaching out there. If they're looking at something and this guy, our local preacher or church, wherever, is not interesting, he's boring, they can flip to somebody that's interesting. If this guy is not, working out the text and doing something helpful, and if he's doing fluff and a lot of sound and fury, switch over to somebody that's preaching from the text and give me something that'll help my life. Mm-hmm. And so I'm saying to myself as a preacher, as preachers, we got to step up our game. And this whole thing has caused preachers to have to do that. And the ones that don't, it's the kiss of death.
Yes.
If preachers don't step up their game and become interesting instead of doing the same old thing all the time, some preachers preach topical sermons all over every Sunday. I've done my share of them. I'm not being down on that, but unless we learn how to do narrative preaching and inductive and deductive combination, and we do something like Thomas Long in his little book, Preaching the Genre of the Bible, where we learn how to preach a different genre of the Bible, and we are interesting, because if we're not interesting, people have got all kinds of choices out there. And I'm hoping a lot of our preachers will step up their game, whether they want to or not. I'm talking to myself now.
Well, me too. I definitely feel the challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, it's preaching has changed so much over the last number of years. Because you didn't have to worry about putting together a PowerPoint, years ago and things like that. And so I'm right with you. I'm right there with you, and it is a challenge.
And I'm really convinced that we have to get back to biblical preaching, and that is, in my humble judgment, expository preaching. And if you look at the churches that are growing, I've looked at churches, some of these Bible fellowship churches. They're not preaching topical sermons. They're preaching solid sermons. I don't agree with a lot of their theology, but I tell you what, they're preaching some solid sermons from the text. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that's a move toward being more biblical on their part, but we need to do that. And I think our people are seeing that there's a lot of fluff out there, and our preaching in our churches, and we've got to rise to the challenge, or we're going to lose a lot of people, because they can go, and at the flip of a switch, they can be out there somewhere else.
Yeah, right.
So,
well, we had Noel on our podcast last week, Noel Whitlock from the College Church of Christ, and one of the things that he pointed out that was so essential was the idea of fellowship. That what we're missing right now, we have more content than ever. We're getting more, daily devotionals and sermons and things like that, classes out on video. Mm-hmm. But what that lacks is that sense of fellowship, the sense of being together. And I think what the pandemic brought out was this reality that so much of our fellowship centers around coming together at the building. Yeah. And then when we couldn't do that, we were kind of left going, well, what do we do? How do we sort of maybe adapt to understand that and help people maybe who are sitting in that digital only realm, who are questioning, why would I come back? Because fellowship to me seems like the key to that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think some of these people, I think Rainer calls them the stragglers. I think that some of these people will come back, and he said that these folks that are kind of digitally with us may be the rich ground for us to bring in the harvest with some of these folks that are not with us, but they're kind of with us. And I think that this is going to be a challenge for us, because we've learned that we don't have to be in the church building to be the church. And if there's any lesson we have learned, it's that we've emphasized all of my life, and I've always been a member of the Church of Christ, and I hope I always will be, plan to be. But we've always been church building centered. And now for the first time we're saying, well, we can be the church. And a lot of people are doing it, just with their families, even though they don't have the fellowship of the broad of the church, they have that little family unit, and then that's their little fellowship group. Others are just meeting with maybe some neighbors down the street, and they got 8 or 10 in their homes. So I think that the fellowship component is necessary across the board, but a lot of people are getting the fellowship. And, they're not getting it in their church building, but they're getting it, and at least a lot of people are. I know some folks that they have, 20 or 30 meeting in their home, in their backyard when it was pretty. And so they're getting that angle. And so I think if we only assume that you can get it at the church building, that's a force we got to deal with, and we've got to learn how to play to that. We got to find out some way to plug into that and to encourage that, because if that's what they're doing and they're not going to come back to the building, let's work with that, and be flexible enough to work with that.
There's another. You kind of lead into another area of the book he devotes a chapter to talking about repurposing our buildings.
Oh, man, that's powerful.
And I thought that was an excellent chapter because so many of our congregations have been guilty of this. We have built very expensive structures that basically are only used 3 or 4 hours out of the entire week.
Oh, yeah.
And he talks about ways in which our buildings can become more community focused. One of the illustrations I know that he used was a church that had actually set up a community laundromat. I'm thinking, whoa.
That was on the edge of my thinking.
I was kind of like, whoa.
I can't get my mind around that yet.
But don't anybody think I've got any ideas here? But I was just like,
but maybe what if that's not as crazy as we think it is? I mean, he points it out that was an inventive way to get a connection with the community. So, and another point that he makes very distinctly is you either connect with that community or you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to last long if you have no real connection with that outside community. And certainly as Scripture would say, the field is white for harvest, right? It's ready. That people are out there that need direction, that need guidance, that need the story we have. Are we going to say, well, because I won't put a couple of coin-operated laundry machines in the building and open it up to people, that I'm not willing to do that? You know what I mean? It's kind of like, where does the line stop where we say, well, I'm not going to be able to do that to advance the gospel? I mean, we've got to be creative, right?
Yeah. If it would save one soul, would it be worth it putting in that corner operated there?
Right.
I think they also mentioned maybe having a police substation at the church,
where
the police, or at least the police could come in and have a break room or something like that, And we don't use our buildings. In fact, what we do is, back in the medieval times, they would build a moat around the castle. I think a lot of our buildings symbolically have dug moats around the building, and it's just for our members. And, we don't use it, 2 or 3 hours a week. Right. But we've kept out people that we could have a stream of people coming in if we really put our mind to it. And we're willing to be flexible and to move out of our comfort zones a little bit. We could be doing all kinds of things. And I love his idea. Find out from the neighborhood what their thinking is about how they can use the building a little bit, And at least we get some input from people, about this. But in fact, I don't know if it was in Rainer's book or some other place, but there was a church that had a code of who could use the building and the rules. And it was 64 pages long. This church, it was like a book of things that hoops you had to jump into, and who could use the book, who could use the church, when it could be used, by whom, and it was 64 pages long, and I thought, I can understand that.
Yeah.
I've seen
a document or two like that. Ours is not 64 pages, but we've got one of those.
His point was that's a great deterrent to keep the community out of the facilities. You shove 64 pages of guidelines in front of them. No thanks, we'll find somewhere else.
That's right. We'll go down. There's another church down the road that'll welcome us with open arms, and our families and everybody we know. But it'll welcome us down there,
Yeah, and I mean that leads into a necessity to shift the way we think about community outreach. A necessity to have a cultural shift in our churches. And he does mention that, cultural shift would be one of the last things that come. But in trying to shift our thinking, what do you think might be the best way for churches, leadership to go about assisting in that necessary shift of thinking?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to how can we open this building up to be relevant to the people around us? And I think part of it would be to have things like Alcohol is Anonymous. We could have a recovery for divorced people. We could have recovery groups for children of whatever. But we could think at all the needs and the hurts. We are a hurting society from A to Z, and we could make a list, pretty long list of people who are hurting out there. And why not do something at the building to connect with people like that? And and to find out where we can maybe be a part of their connection to life, and then maybe move them from there to even become Christians.
Yeah.
So we're just going to have to get out of our little comfort zone. And we're very prone to do that, to get in our little comfort zone, and it hurts our brains to think about something different.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to get over that if we're going to do anything to connect with this new world we're in.
Yeah.
Well, that's something that we, as we kind of think going forward, is getting out of our comfort zones, because certainly there is not a thing about the gospel that says comfortable. Yeah. There's not a time when Jesus says, "Oh, this will be easy. It'll be comfortable. It'll be nice. You just kind of do this, and we'll get through, and everything will be good." It's very much a challenge that Christ puts to us, that you are going to get out of your comfort zone. You are going to do something that's difficult for you. So how do we sort of make some of these changes? And we all know we struggle with change. We struggle with adapting to new things. How do we do that in the most loving way possible to help people understand we don't want to destroy what you've always known and loved about the church? You're here now. We want to see more people come to know Christ. So how do we help people kind of work their way through those changes when really we struggle with change?
Yeah. Well, I have thought a lot since I've not been in the church building. I've had a lot of time to reflect, and I've had a very heretical thought. And the thought is, how can we do better? That's my heretical thought. How can we do better? We don't like asking that question. As elderships, we're comfortable. We got the good old boy group, and we don't want to rock the boat. But to your point, it goes back to the eldership. If the elders are willing to open up their eyes, if they're willing to kind of be willing to do some things different, and you're always going to have people who reject. There's always going to be an element in the church that no matter what you do, they're going to be against it. I hate to say that about my brethren, but I've preached for 50 to 60 years now, and I've never seen a church where you didn't have some maybe person or some little group that was going to stop the work of the church over their objection. And we've got to move beyond that. We've got to be elderships who are willing to take some heat and then be willing to educate our people. And if they don't like what we're doing with the building, and we've got to educate them about what the church is. It's not the building. We all know that, but some people don't know that too well. And so I think a lot of what is going to happen, whether we move forward or whether we stay like we are or move back probably, is going to depend on the elders. Whether the elders will be open their eyes and be willing to be flexible enough to say, look, we got to move forward. We're going to have some people that are not going to be on this bus. They may be waiting for another bus down the road, but they're not going to be on this bus we're all on right here. Yeah. And then they're going to fuss and kick up some dust, but we're going to have to move on without them if that's the way it has to be. They can go down the road someplace if it comes. Because we can't stop this church from being the church that it needs to be to the people of this world. Yeah. And
That's exactly right.
And if we can't get over that, we are doomed for failure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was one of the things that Thom pointed out that I thought about was so difficult to understand was, he kind of says like you got to do what you got to do, and if you're doing what's right and what's scriptural, and you're trying to reach people with the gospel, and somebody just doesn't like it because they're uncomfortable with it, yeah, you're right. They're going to miss this bus, and that's on them. That's not on you. You've got to be willing to stand for the gospel first. And kind of say, if you can't be loving and educated, brother, and try to do everything you can to help someone understand why you're doing things differently, and they still don't want to accept that maybe that's on them, and we need to be okay with that they're going to make that choice. Yeah.
I just finished writing an article for our local paper that I entitled "Invest and Improve," and I related a story. Back in the early 1990s, for 5-6 years, I preached for a congregation in a small town about 40 miles from Searcy. And those of you who know me know where I'm talking about, but I won't mention the name of the town. But back in the, I guess probably in the 1970s, this up-and-coming retail company called Walmart came to the city leaders of that town and said, we'd like to put a distribution center here in your town. The deal was the city leaders were going to have to fund some capital improvements, water, sewage, streets, things such as this to make that happen. Mm-hmm. And they said, they talked about it and they said, no, we don't want to do that. No, we're not willing to make the investment. And so Walmart said, okay, well, they came to Searcy. This was in the late 70s. I can remember being a student here at the time when the first distribution center was built out here on Park. Yeah. Well, that was supposed to have been built elsewhere, but
did not know that.
They came here, and not only did that thrive, they ended up building a second distribution center on South Main, and now I would dare say those two distribution centers are major employers here in this city, while the other town is just about to dry up. I mean, it's just sad, and I think the church is the same way. If we are not willing to invest in these things in whatever ways needs to happen, then we are really setting the stage for a failure.
Oh, we are, and that's Rainer's thought right there in a nutshell, that we cannot use the methods that used to work in a world that's no longer there. Oh, yeah. This world that we used to be in, and those methods may have worked, and those things may have worked there, but we're living in a new era, whether we like it or not, whether we even realize it or not. Was that old Bob Dylan's song, "The Times They Are A-Changing"? Yeah. Hey, listen, brother, we need to be playing that at our elders' meetings, We'll take out the instrumental music part, but we'll play it, the times they are a-changing,
I think if you take the music out of Bob Dylan, you don't have much left.
You're right. But this is, and what you're saying, Steve, is so true. Businesses ask the question all the time, how can we do better? Why aren't churches doing this all the time? Why aren't we all the time saying, how can we be better here? How can we do better here? And we have to ask it of and I hate to say it, I'm a preacher, we have to ask it of our preaching. How can we do better? Does the preacher need to step it up somehow or another? Or move them out? I don't know. I'm not trying to say. Yeah. But we got to ask the question, how can we do better? Businesses do it all the time. Athletes, I play golf. I like to play. How can I do better? I know professional golfers, they are always asking that question, how can I do better? Yeah. And I hope in the church we can be comfortable with that and not be put off with, how can we do better? What can we do to connect better with this neighborhood? Yeah. What can we do to make it work better?
Yeah, Rainer, he addressed 9 key changes, I believe it was, towards the end of his book that kind of addressed that heretical question that you've been reflecting on, and that is, how can we do better? And one of the things that he mentions is doing a few things well, as opposed to trying to do a lot of things, somewhat average. Yeah. And so, to me, that implies a need to prune maybe various ministries. And in going forward, what would be a healthy way for churches to maybe look to pruning different activities, different ministries even?
Well, I think we have to be focused, and the main focus that I'm very biased about this, but evangelism. We need to do whatever it takes to be evangelistic in this church, and things that we do in the church, ministries we do in the church that are not contributing to that need to be looked at. Any activity of the church that does not forward the idea and the process of reaching lost people, whatever it is, if it's something we're doing, we sponsor, whatever, if we have an Easter egg hunt, whatever, if it's not helping to contact people and make a point to, at least a point of contact for people who are not Christians, we don't need to be doing it. We're going to have to look at everything from top to bottom and say, what are we doing, and become focused more on discipleship and helping people that don't know the Lord come into the church, become Christians.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think in his discussion, as we were mentioning earlier about church facilities, changing the way that we think about the church facilities just being for us and shifting that to how can we use our facilities as a means of outreach. We mentioned coin laundry, Matt. If we just put that out there, but not make it a point of evangelism, if we just make this, a service to the community, but not utilize that to teach people that are coming in to utilize that service, then it's a lost cause.
Boy, he make, and along the same line, he made such a great point. The church usually is for us. It's a tool for us, and it is a tool. We have to have a place, but we don't think about how can we use this church as a tool. I mean, it's a tool. It's a resource that we can use, and we're just going to have to do some good, fresh, new thinking about that.
Yeah.
Well, I think we see that taking place even in our community here. There is a rapidly growing church here in Searcy that has recently moved into new facilities that are very prominently located. I mean, and what they did was, of all things, they took an old warehouse and repurposed it, but it's strategically located, and I've not been in it, but I've heard people talk about it, and it is very, very community focused. In fact, this week, they I think, are having a COVID vaccination clinic there. Yeah. Now, that's the type of thing I think we're talking about, where we're going to have to get people, reach out to people in our communities, and not just do that as just a community service, but use it to establish connections with people. And relationships.
That's a great point, a great example. And one of the things they had that would be, I guess, heretical maybe in some ways for us, but they put in a coffee shop.
They did.
Imago Day is the name of it. Some group is coming in there, and they're going to have a coffee shop in there. People going to become, it's a point of contact. We've got to look for points of contact. And the building can be used for that, and they are doing it. I told Sherry the other day, I said, there's going to be a huge sucking sound in this town. It's going to be that church sucking members, sucking students right off under our noses, because they're willing to do some things that we're not willing to do. And that's just going to be the bottom line to it, and not going to be pretty in some places.
And that's kind of Tom's point too, is that's when you dry up. That's when things go wrong, when you realize that if you're going to keep it all the same way and you're not going to adapt, you don't survive. That's the only way to survive, is to adapt and care about that community and reach out to it, and really be the gospel. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the original command from Jesus, right? Carry this message out into the world. He didn't say, well, do it a certain way, and if it doesn't work that way, oh well, they're lost. He says, no, you leave those 99, you go get that one, and whatever it takes for you to do that, that's what you do. That's what you do. Stop sitting on a building. If that building is not gonna serve the Lord and serve the gospel, then you got to rethink what you're doing.
Exactly.
And that's hard.
Exactly. And I think it probably bears saying. I don't want anybody to think that what we are saying here is an endorsement of their doctrine.
No.
Not at all. But we're simply saying they have found a means of connecting with people's felt needs. And we have to do that, and then use those relationships to share the Word of God with them, and to teach what's right, and to teach what's true.
And what a great point. And I'm glad you made that point, because I think when people hear me or maybe others talking about how can we do better, immediately they think we're talking about changing our doctrines. And I always have to add this disqualifier to this, or a qualifier to it, that I'm not talking about changing. We're not talking about changing our doctrines. We're not going to change baptism. We're not going to change women in the pulpit. We're not going to change speaking in tongues or handling snakes. We're not going to do. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about changing practical, everyday matters that we can do better. And that's what we've got to look at. And kind of along your lines, Steve, God help us if we start changing our beliefs in New Testament Christianity and undenominational Christianity. If we move away from that, we're sunk in a big time way. But we've got to look at some practical everyday ways we can make points of contact with the outside world, with these people who are not.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up those, because that was one of the questions I had, is what are the vital things that we need to communicate that we're not going to change in the midst of suggesting different changes. And I mean, sticking to doctrine is key. And, as Thom Rainer outlines the book, and two key things kind of rose to the top for me, and that is the Word of God, and the other is prayer.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to know, what prayer ministries have you seen arise, that you've seen thrive? How should the church move forward with prayer ministry?
Well, I don't know what other churches have done, but I know at the College Church we are firm believers in prayer. We spent a whole year dedicated to prayer, and we had different lessons on prayer taught in all of our Bible classes. At least once or twice a month. We had Noel preaching on prayer. We had an emphasis on prayer. We had people sign up for 24 hours of prayer. I know right now I'm part of a group, and we pray and fast at least once a month. And we've kind of put prayer over on the sideline a bit, but it's got to be front and center of our discipleship. It's got to be front and center of our disciple making. It's got to be front and center of what we do at the church. It's got to be front and center of living in a different world post-COVID. We've got to put it up there, Casey, and I'm glad you mentioned that. That'd be
I mean, prayer ministry has changed vitally, or significantly over the last year. And I've seen prayer groups happening on Zoom, prayer ministries through Facebook, and so the opportunities for prayer ministry has grown exponentially. And I'm glad that Thom in his book highlighted that as one of the great needs in moving forward with the post-quarantine church.
It's easy to forget prayer in our daily lives. It's easy to forget prayer in the life of the church and how important it is. And I'm just thinking about one thing that I was impressed with myself. I'd never done it. We walked through our community praying. We just had a walk through praying for this community. We'd come to a house and we'd pray for the people in this house and pray for these others. And maybe a lot of the people we didn't know, we don't know what their needs were, but that's one way we can, in a very, I think, if you want a kind of a easy entrance into this thing, I think walking through the neighborhood, praying for the neighborhood is a wonderful way. But boy, prayer has got to be front and center. It's got to be there. We're dead to water if we don't.
Well, Paul, one of the last things we like to ask our guests as we're kind of wrapping things up here, what is a piece of scripture, a passage, something that has stood out to you maybe over the pandemic or here recently in your study? What's something that stood out to you that's just really guided and helped you through all this?
Yeah. Well, and it's something Rainer mentioned in his book toward the end, and that is we've got to know in the midst of all of this, God is with us. And I love that passage over in Matthew 28, 19 and 20. You go into all the world. You take that gospel. And he said, I am with you always. I am with you always. And that's something that has stuck out with me, that in the midst of our very, bad situation, it's just been a bad situation every way you look at it, God has been at work, and He is with us, and He will be with us. And I think if we're faithful, I know He'll be faithful. Yeah. But that passage has really resonated with me. Yeah.
That's a great way to summarize that.
Yeah. I can't think of a better passage to end.
Yeah. Something else that we enjoy asking is, we've been talking about this book the whole podcast, but has there been any other book that has kind of rose to the surface, been kind of top of thinking outside of the Bible that you've read in the last few months that you'd like to mention?
Yeah. Well, I read all the time, and Canoe in the Mountains has been good. Yeah. Some of you guys may have read that. Man, incredible book. I love Lewis and Clark, and man, the leadership lessons in that book, you could spend a whole session just talking about Canoe in the Mountains.
It's interesting. I think
Noel mentioned that.
I've had Noel
that too.
So that's 2 weeks in a row. So you might want to go check that book out.
Yeah. I think the book that has probably had as much impact on me as any of them has been Disciple Shift. not discipleship, but discipleship. And we've started a disciple making. We have to be careful here because some people think it's the Crossroads, Boston, disciple thing. But there's a biblical mandate for disciple making, and we're trying to take that very seriously at the college church. And we have a disciple making ministry, and we are using Discovery Bible Study. I don't know if you're familiar with Discovery. One of the best ways in the world to reach out to people, and anybody can do it. You can, everybody in this church, everybody at the college church ought to know how to do a disciple study. It's straightforward, simple. That has changed my thinking a lot. But Discipleship is really a book that has tons of good wisdom about how to reach out. Most of us have not done it. As preachers, I preach my sermon, and that's my reach out, or that's it. Or I'm an elder, and I'm shepherding some folks. But there's so many other ways to reach out. We've got to be, and he mentions this in the book, that we're in a world where we're getting to know our neighbors a little bit. Everybody walks, well, not, as things have changed, but at the time, the only thing you could do to get out and entertain yourself was to either play golf, which was a very bad habit. Churchill said it's a bad walk destroyed. A good walk disturbed or killed. But walking and people in our neighborhood, I have seen people up and down our street I'd never seen before. Yeah. And we'd get to talking, and we'd be out walking, and I live just down here or over here, and so we've got a world now where we can make some contacts, and we've got to just figure out how to capitalize on that. And discipleship has changed my thinking about evangelism. I'm always on the lookout. I get my best prospects over at Planet Fitness. I'm always looking out for some guy. And I have one guy, I was sitting next to a chair. They have these, if you've been there, they got these massage chairs, and you're sitting right next to a person for 10 or 15 minutes. It's a golden opportunity. And old Larry was there, and I was talking to Larry, and a few months before that, he'd been on the verge of suicide and just all kinds of things. And so I said, "Hey, Larry, how would you like to come to church with us?" Came to church with us. We had Bible studies with him. We'd work with him. And I've got of course, I've been away from Planet Fitness now with this COVID thing, but I got a long list of folks out there. They don't know it. But old Pollard's going to be popping the question pretty soon. And I'm always on the look. In my neighborhood, if an ambulance comes through and stops at somebody's house, next day I go there and say, "Is there anybody I can pray for?" I got old Grant and Mary. I'm working with them. They're kind of little interesting folks. But I got Larry down the street from me. He sits out on his front porch. Got to know him. He gives me turtles. We take cookies to him, bread. You've got to be on the lookout. And I've had my awareness heightened. Discipleship has caused that. So I would say that book has probably been it.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us for today's podcast. We really appreciate you giving us your time.
Love being here.
As we kind of sign off, as usual, we always say, if you have any questions, things you'd like for us to answer, if you'd like to pass a question along to Paul, you can always email the church, questions@wschurch.net, and we will certainly pass along a question if you have it for Paul, or if you have a question you would love for us to answer live on the show. Please send us your questions, and we would be more than happy to do that.
And my middle name is Doc Dodge and Hyde. Duck Dodge and Hyde. So any questions? That's my middle name, Duck Dodge and Hyde. That's actually the name of my brother's business, is Duck Dodge and Hyde.
Dodge and Hyde.
Well, as always, we love you guys. We're so thankful that you tuned in to our podcast today, and we hope that you guys have a wonderful day.
God bless.
Thank you.